AEW have made their long-awaited debut, and they failed to live up to the hype. Welcome, everyone, to your Enhancement Talent review for All Elite Wrestling, or All Hype Wrestling, as you see in the picture here. The debut episode of Dynamite on TNT this Wednesday night as I record this. And yeah, we're going to get right to it. And this is probably not going to be an opinion that everyone agrees with. But I felt like this show failed to live up to the hype surrounding it. And the reason I say that is just a lot of little things that built up into illogical booking decisions. The show, it started off fantastic. The Cody and Sammy Guevara match, excellent. And we'll get into that in detail. But everything after that did not even come close to touching it. So there were a lot of illogical things that happened. There were a lot of things that didn't make any sense. There was a lot of damaging things, even on this show, to certain people. But, you know, the main thing is just that there were so many things that didn't make sense. There were a lot of things that didn't live up to what we could have expected of them. And, you know, Cody and Sammy, they did a great job starting off the show. But with all of the hype surrounding this show, and this being the first episode of TNT, and this isn't to say that there was no good to come of this, because there was a lot of good. Commentary, I thought, was very good tonight. Tony Schiavone, inserting him with JR and Excalibur, I thought he fit like a glove with them. I thought they were a fantastic trio together. The production value, I liked the way that everything was shot. I thought it was all good in that direction. And, you know, just the directive that, you know, they based this show largely on the matches that were promoted beforehand. And then they had a few little things in between. And, you know, that's not a bad thing to do. I like that format. But everything outside of the Cody and Sammy Guevara match that started off this show, I don't think anything was above average after that. And when we have this debut and we're supposed to be competing with WWE, even though sometimes they say they're competing, sometimes they don't. Who the hell knows at this point? But when that is out there, and when you're going head-to-head with WWE's NXT, which I'll have my review on later, probably Thursday morning, when I get the chance to watch that, because I was all in on just watching this show. But when you're going head-to-head with that, and you come out of the gate, and the best thing I can say is that it was average, then that shouldn't be the goal. I felt like this show laid an egg. And that's not to say that there's no rebounding from that. That's not to say that I'm selling any AEW stock right now and that they can't turn this around, and that, you know, next week might be better when we get to Full Gear, that could be a great show. That's not what I'm saying. But I have to look at these things objectively on a case-by-case basis. And this just did not live up to the first ever episode of Dynamite on TNT. It just didn't live up to what it possibly could have been. And we'll get into all of that, but, you know, I'm not hating on AEW. And, in fact, I love what AEW has done up to this point with a lot of their pay-per-view shows and all the things I've seen from them. Like, I've had critiques, but overall, I've enjoyed what they've put on. But this, and it's not to say I didn't enjoy it, but you have to be objective. And when something has this much hype and expectation around it, I just didn't feel like it lived up. So, we're going to go segment by segment, break this whole thing down now. We started off, we're going to have the Cody and Sammy Guevara match. And they show a short video package recapping the things that they did on the YouTube channel for the road to TNT between Cody and Sammy. And they only showed a little bit of it, but it was enough to show the narrative that they were going for, with Sammy being the underdog in this case. Even though he's the heel, the bad guy in this case, he's still the underdog. And the feeling that Cody has so much on his plate that he is overlooking Sammy, and that he hopes that's what happens, with Cody being the executive vice president and having to focus on everything with going to TNT and dealing with everything that he has to deal with, and then the match with Jericho he has to focus with. So, you know, that sort of narrative that Sammy is the underdog. And they showed just enough of it to where you got the narrative that they didn't need to play the whole thing, so that was good. They go to the match, Cody and Sammy Guevara. Cody enters and gets a hero's ovation from this crowd, and Sammy gets his entrance afterwards and gets booed heavily. Got great heat for him. I find it interesting that they did the narrative of Sammy being the underdog while also being the heel. That's not something that I'm very accustomed to. Not to say it didn't work. It's just something that you definitely don't see often. Normally the heel is, in the reverse role, that, they could be the one overlooking the babyface that is the underdog and trying to pull off the upset and yada yada yada. So in this case, they've shown that they're not beholden to heel and babyface traditional dynamics, which I think can work, because I feel like everyone in AEW, for the most part, it's not, at least for a lot of guys, there's a lot of in-between guys. There's a lot of guys that aren't really defined heels, not really defined baby faces. There's kind of that shades of gray. So, Sammy is definitively a heel. But you also sort of built more of a narrative for him other than just being a heel who's going to challenge Cody Rhodes, and it gave you a much more detailed story to really be able to sink into. So I like that, and then they did a lot of those good things in the Road to TNT on the YouTube series. They did some good stuff with Brandon Cutler and MJF as well. Not on this show, on the Road to TNT shows I'm talking about. But, yeah, I find that interesting in a good way. And, yeah, I'm interested to see how they do with things like that with other characters going forward, to be able to invest in everyone as an authentic personality rather than just being a 100% heel or a 100% babyface, that there's actual character traits in there, and I like that they showed that. So we get to the match, and there's a lot of just showmanship sort of spots early with Guevara doing like the poses and the taunts and all that. Cody's going to hit a beautiful looking, I wrote it as a springboard stunner, but it was really like a springboard cutter. And then later on, a few minutes later, Sammy is going to hit one of his own. Cody goes for a dive, but Sammy, who is being yelled at by Brandi Rhodes on the outside, he pulls Brandy in the way of Cody's dive, and Cody takes out his wife. And by take out, I mean he knocks her down. It wasn't a date night tonight. Oldest trick in the book there. Talk about being untraditional. This was very traditional. Just pull the manager in the way. Cody hits his wife. And then that distraction allows Sammy to take advantage as Cody is checking to make sure Brandy's okay. Guevara, I think he throws him into the post at some point. He goes off the top rope with the moonsault, but Cody rolls out of the way. Then he goes for a standing moonsault, sort of like what Andrade does, where he does the moonsault, but then the guy rolls out of the way, so then he just does a standing moonsault. This took it a step further because he did that, and then he did the standing moonsault, but Cody rolled out of the way again, so then he transitioned that into a standing shooting star press. That was a neat little spot they did there. And that gets a near fall. But then after this is where we get into maybe the touch of grace sort of thing, as I was talking about, in a bad way, because Brandy comes back in, and she's on the outside of the ring, and at some point, I guess the ref is distracted. However, I don't remember, but Brandy gets a cheap shot in on Sammy Guevara, and Cody off the back of that hits a disaster kick for a near fall. So I don't really like that the baby faces are trying to cheat. Don't really care for that. I guess it's just like I get what they're going for, is that it's the comeuppance for that spot, because Guevara pulled Brandy in the way of a dive from Cody. So I get that they had Brandy get a revenge there and that sort of thing. So I won't hate on this as much because it wasn't the finish of the match. If it was, I probably wouldn't have liked it as much if Cody just pinned him after that and he wins by cheating. But I didn't really care for it a lot, but it at least makes sense. Cody is going to hit Guevara with an inverted top rope superplex for another near fall. After that, Cody goes up to the top again, but this time Sammy Guevara meets him at the top rope, jumping to the top rope and flying off both of them with a Spanish fly for another near fall. Sammy is going to quickly go to the top rope again. He's going to go for a shooting star press, but Cody is able to get the knees up and then gets an inside cradle roll-up for the win on Sammy Guevara. I thought this match was awesome. There was investment in it on both sides with what they did leading into it. So you already had something to care about before the match, and then they went in there and they put on a really good match. And the thing that really enhanced this is that the first 25 to 30 minutes of this show, there were 0 commercials. And it kind of goes into the territory of, is that sort of preferential treatment that Cody's match was the only one that didn't have to deal with any of these commercial breaks throughout it? You could make that argument that maybe there's some self-indulgence there, but ignoring that, it made this match feel so much more fun, and we saw all of it, and there was investment there with everything they did beforehand, and then they got in there, they paced it well, they built everything up well. It was a very well-worked match. So I give both of them a ton of credit. They did the best thing on this show, which the problem is that they did the best thing on the show on the first match, and there was nothing that was going to be able to follow it, unfortunately. So Tony Schiavone, after this, goes in the ring to interview Cody Rhodes afterwards. But Sammy Guevara gets up as Tony is asking Cody a question. Guevara pulls Cody away, but he ends up offering him a handshake. And Cody and Sammy, they shake hands and they embrace. And I was very ready to not like this, because so many AEW matches on the pay-per-views and all that have ended with the show of respect, the shake hands, which is good when it's warranted. But then sometimes you just do it for no reason and it doesn't make it feel important. But in this case, Sammy, he duped him. He tricked him. Because as they're shaking hands, out comes Chris Jericho out of nowhere. He comes in to blindside Cody, and he hits a code breaker on him, and that's when we go into the first commercial, which is about 25 minutes into the show. So we go into the commercial, but it has the picture-in-picture as Jericho is still beating the hell out of Cody. He hits him with another code breaker. He's throwing him out of the ring, hitting him with steel chairs, all that. And he just keeps beating him up, hits 2 code breakers until they come back from commercial. And Jericho, I think he hit he's still beating up Cody, but then he hits a power bomb onto 2 seated steel chairs sitting parallel to each other. You would think that someone would want to stop this, would want to help their executive vice president. But nobody other than Aubrey Edwards was trying to stop this. And Aubrey wasn't really trying all that hard either. Even Brandy was just sitting there watching, like she couldn't go get someone to help or something. So this was a good start, and this thing that they did here is going to sort of foreshadow what happens later on in the night, actually. Jericho, he has a mic at the top of the ramp, simply says, "I am Chris Jericho, and I am Le Champion." And that's how they end this segment. And Jericho is the best. So after this is where things slowly started to creep off a cliff. Because now we get Brandon Cutler versus MJF. And I was so ready to enjoy this match too, because they did a cool job building it. MJF even did the promo on his way to the ring, making fun of the crowd and how Brandon Cutler's just like everyone, blah blah blah, heel stuff. But the thing's going into it that Brandon Cutler, it's funny that the whole thing largely was based around Dungeons and Dragons, where MJF took like that gym selfie and just with the captions, I don't play Dungeons and Dragons, that somehow offended a lot of people. And Brandon Cutler, they did some good stuff for him on that Road to TNT series as well, and built him up. But then we get to the actual match. And the great thing with the Sammy Guevara and Cody match is that they built it up well, but then they delivered when it was time. This match did not do that, and I don't know if it was because it wasn't given the chance to, or if it was because of a simple botch that happened in this match that really screwed things up, or what the deal was, but however it happened, this did not work. So, start off just basic stuff. Cutler, the only really big spot of this match, and it comes right towards the finish, is Cutler hits a nice dive to the outside. He starts pounding on MJF on the outside of the ring, and then he throws him back in the ring. And Cutler goes to the top rope. And, he does that thing that a lot of people do, that, like, you go up to the top rope and you're crouched and you slowly rise up. But as Cutler is doing that, he slips and falls off the top rope. And it looked to me like it was not intentional, but to Brandon Cutler's credit, he tried to sell his knee and act like he was injured, and that played into it. So he starts selling the knee, and then MJF comes in, he takes him down, and he puts him in an arm bar, and Brandon Cutler taps out. So yeah. I have no idea what the plan for this match was, but I feel like MJF should have called an audible after this, because Cutler's selling the knee, but MJF finished him with an armbar. So, MJF, if maybe in hindsight, he probably thinks this, but probably should have done like some sort of knee submission, like a knee bar, something, a half crab, even, whatever you want to do. But something other than the armbar, because that's not what was injured. So, yeah, this whole thing did Brandon Cutler no favors. This match was very short, and MJF wins decisively off of a botch is what I'm gonna call it. I mean, I don't know. Like, it doesn't seem like there's much Cutler can do coming off of that. But MJF, he keeps his heat, and I guess that's good. That's the one positive. So this part was weird, and I'll cover it a little bit, but Chris Van Vliet is out. Good dude, Chris Van Vliet. Very, very happy for him to have this chance in AEW and I've always been a fan of what he's done with his channel and all the interviews that he's done, and being able to work his way to now being employed by AEW. It's a great story for him. But he's out to interview some guys to type a movie. Doesn't even matter. Not even relevant. But Angelico and Jack Evans come out, and they start making fun of the guys. But then Private Party come in through the crowd, and they're just being Private Party. They're like they have some drinks in their hands. They just walk over there, and then a couple seconds later they walk away, and then that's it. That's all that happened. I guess this was some sort of thing that they were thinking was going to hype up the tag team tournament, which I'm assuming starts next week. Not sure it did that. This just made no sense, and I don't know why it was there. After this, we had an SCU promo, not an in-ring promo, but a pre-tape thing, and they're in Washington, D.C., of course. And so they do a thing like outside the White House, and by outside the White House, I mean the White House is like way in the back to where they're shooting this. But Scorpio Sky does like a Barack Obama impression to start this thing, and then they transition it into the whole worst town I've ever been in, yada yada yada. That whole shtick. This was at least funny. Then they cut back, and Tony Schiavone is out interviewing SoCal Uncensored. Scorpio says that he's going to sit this one out, as in the tournaments. He says that there's no doubt that the experience of Kazarian and Daniels are the best chance to win the titles in this tournament. But then after that, the Lucha Bros come out, they interrupt. They say they're the best tag team in the world. A brawl breaks out, and refs quickly break it up. Unlike the Cody and Jericho beatdown earlier. Nobody wanted to help their executive vice president, but everyone was all hands on deck to break up this fight. Yeah, I mean, this was like little stuff to try to type the tag team tournament because they weren't doing anything on the show for it this week. So, I mean, there was nothing wrong with this. It just felt like filler, though. After this, we get Pac versus Adam Hangman Page. And I was really expecting a barn burner match. Like, I was like, okay, there was a bit of bad stuff since then, but this will surely be where we rise things back up. We get everything back in motion. this match wasn't that great. And that is not to say it was bad. It was a fine match. They got some time. They did have to deal with a couple commercials, I think. But it was fine. But it just felt like, to me, that it never really got out of second gear. Like, it never hit that next level. It was just fine. And, they did some fine stuff. The dives and the moonsaults and all that. But it wasn't really what I would have expected. And probably because they're setting up for a rematch, they didn't want to give the whole thing away. They didn't want to give everything away that they could do. They want to save that. Which, I would ask why book the match tonight then if that's what you're going to do. But I feel like that's the direction that it's going with how it finished. Which, the way it finished is Pac is going to... he's going to be pushed into the ropes by Paige. Like what they do when they're going to set up for a roll-up where you push him into the ropes and then you try to roll through. But Pac almost hits referee Earl Hebner. One shot to Earl and he might die in that ring, so they better be careful. But they stop short, but with Earl's view obstructed, Pac is going to basically hit like a mule kick to Hangman's balls. Low blow. After that, Pac hits up a black arrow to the back of Hangman Page. Then he puts in the brutalizer, is what they're calling it, which is basically the rings of Saturn. And Hangman passes out and they call for the bell. So, it was fine. The finish was a cop-out to get to a later match, is what I'm assuming. But, yeah, I mean, it was just there. It was just a fine match. I don't think it scratched the surface of what Pac and Hangman could do together. So, the bright side is we can look forward to that at some point down the line. But I was expecting more for this to really pick up the show from where it was. But, nay. Britt Baker comes out for commentary for the Nyla Rose versus Riho match for the AEW Women's World Championship. And this is where things really fell off a cliff for me. And I didn't think this was a bad match either. I thought Nyla and Riho worked really hard. I thought they actually did a lot of good things in this match. But this match was so damaging. So just to get to it. Nyla catches Riho when Riho is doing a top rope dive to the outside of the ring. Nyla catches her. And then she does a backbreaker. She lays Riho out. But then Nyla goes under the ring and grabs a chair. And she tries to hit Riho with said chair. Now keep in mind, since this match is for the inaugural Women's World Championship, and neither Nyla or Riho have champion's advantage. If Nyla were to lose by disqualification, then Riho would win the title. That's just how it would work. And Nyla went out of her way to try to be disqualified in this match. She tries to hit Riho with this chair, but the ref takes it. And that would have been terrible enough as it was, if that was the only thing they did. Because it just makes Nyla Rose look like a moron. That she's going to hit someone with a chair in plain sight of the referee and expect to not be disqualified. So then, Nyla takes out like 5 chairs and lays them around ringside. All in a little bundle together. And She lays Riho on top of these chairs. And then she climbs to the top of the apron of the ring and does a senton. But Riho moves out of the way, so Nyla splats onto the chairs. Somehow none of this was a DQ. And Nyla looks like an absolute moron. Nyla, who is a big monster sort of character. And Riho, who is less than 100 pounds soaking wet with a brick in each pocket. But with that being said, Nyla had to try to resort to this to try to win the match. And even if she was successful with this, and this is what I'm wondering, like, if Nyla would have just squashed Riho there, would that have been a disqualification? Would anything be a disqualification? Like, it feels like there's no rules in these matches. And we're going to get to that in the main event, because that was fucking ridiculous. But this, it just made Nyla look so dumb. And then by the end of it, she's going to look dumb and weak. So, Riho gets what I thought was going to be some hope spots. She does a roll-up that looked like it was a 3, but Nyla kicks out at the last second. Riho somehow gets a Northern Lights suplex off of the top rope for another near fall. But then Riho, after missing a couple times, she hits a running knee to Nyla and pins her. Wins the AEW World title, the Women's World title, right there. So Nyla, after resorting to using weapons against Riho, while already having the significant advantage over her just from pure size, already looked like an idiot there. But then, even with that, she still lost clean. Not even just clean. She lost with a clear advantage over Riho. This was ridiculous. And it's the second time, if I'm not mistaken, that Riho has pinned Nyla. Because she got her in a roll-up in that triple threat match. Nyla is 1-3 in AEW. With the one win being the Battle Royal that got her this match. They have portrayed her terribly. She's this big, imposing figure that should be built like Nia Jax is in WWE, or, like a Braun Strowman, or any other big person. Nyla towers over anyone else in that women's division, especially Riho. But now, she's been beaten cleanly multiple times. I have no reason to take her as any serious threat. She was done after this show. They buried her dead. So, the Nyla Rose in AEW, it was fun. It was fun. But she's dead now. There's no coming back from this. I'm sorry. So, after the match, Michael Nakazawa, I guess it was, is going to come out and I guess try to interview Riho or celebrate or whatever. I don't know. But Nyla gets back up. She blindsides Nakazawa. She hits a powerbomb on Nakazawa that she almost lost her grip on and very nearly dropped this dude on his head. Genuinely. But then gets him back up, hits the powerbomb. She beats down Riho as well, but she's going to go for something on the apron when Kenny Omega runs in to stop her, because Kenny, they've sort of told the story that he's kind of like the one that's bringing in the Joshi girls, and that he's the one that really saw something in them. So he he stops this. Nyla leaves as Kenny tends to Riho. And so they try to get Nyla's heat back, but it's too late. You can't. You beat her 3 times now in very laughably bad fashion. I mean, Riho is the women's world champion now, and, good for her. But this wasn't the route to take. And it just didn't work. It made Nyla look so bad for multiple reasons. The trying to disqualify herself made her look like an idiot. And then losing to a 100-pound woman made her look incredibly weak. So, sorry. That's just how I feel about it. To give credit, though, because I don't want to sound like I'm all negative on this. Both of these girls did their best. And I thought they put on a fairly good match if you ignore the little things like Nyla trying to disqualify herself and the stupidity of her trying to do that swanton from the apron onto the chairs and everything in between there. It was a fine match, and they did their best. So, I will give them credit for that, but, they're, like I said, I have to be objective with this stuff. This wasn't good. And it wasn't really either of their faults. So now we get to the main event. And after the last hour of television before this, I was just ready for something good. And so we have the 6-man, the Elite, Kenny Omega and the Bucks, versus Jericho and LAX, who I guess aren't LAX anymore. They're Santana and whatever the other guy's name is. I already forget. I have it written down somewhere, but they're LAX. So we get into this match. Jericho does a good bit early on where Kenny Omega starts off the match. So Jericho on the outside asks for the tag and then immediately tags right back out. That was good. He tags back in Santana. The match breaks down. The Bucks hit some super kicks and do some dives. Then I don't know what the hell Omega was even doing here, but he's like, as the Bucks are on the outside with LAX and beating them down, I thought they were setting up for Kenny to do a dive, but instead he just stands there posing. He does these stupid gestures and then gets down on one knee, doing all the goofy shit that Kenny Omega normally does. But then the crowd roars, and Jon Moxley comes in, standing behind Omega, who slowly begins to realize that something ain't right. Omega turns around into a fist from Jon Moxley, and they brawl. And brawl they did all the way into the crowd, into what they said was the VIP room. And all the while this is happening, this match is still going on in the ring. There has not been a disqualification called. Someone that isn't in the match comes in and beats up someone in the match and takes him out. And there's no disqualification? What? Moxley hits Omega with a DDT through a glass coffee table, which was an incredible visual. It doesn't need to be said that was gimmicked, but either way, I mean, that's still nothing easy to do, even if that was sugar glass or whatever it might have been. But they go to commercial off the back of this. And I'm thinking that maybe they'll come back and they'll have some sort of announcement that it was a disqualification, but then they'll restart it somehow, or the Bucks will get a third partner or something. But the match just continued as it was. So if this was what they wanted to do, then why didn't they just have Moxley take out Omega before the match happened? And then you can have the Bucks say, well, we're not going to end the show like this. We'll fight you guys 2-on-3. But they skipped that step. They did this during the match and ignored any common sense or rules. And to me, that is insulting your audience. And that's something that I hear a lot of reviews all the time criticizing WWE for, that they insult their audience. Well, we have to hold AEW to that same standard. This was insulting. That we can just, whenever it's convenient to us, act like there isn't any rules. It's no different than what WWE does. Like, I don't know, trying to think of an example. Like, I remember there was one of those tag matches recently where the ref called it one way, but then another ref came down and they looked at an instant replay, and then the ref decided to restart the match or whatever. Like, you can look at that case and say that it's insulting to the audience, because what about all the times that a heel cheats to win and there is no instant replay? Like, that's not a thing in wrestling, but then when it's convenient to you, then it is. So in this case, there are disqualifications, but in this case, because it was convenient to what AEW was trying to do, they're just going to ignore that. Am I the only one who gives a shit about the rules? Come on, this was ridiculous. And I'll say it again, like, they could have easily went around this a different way. And they could have had Omega get attacked backstage. They could have had him get attacked by Moxley during his entrance. They could have done a load of different things other than what they did. And this whole thing, it just made no sense, and it makes this whole thing look phony, which is the last thing that you want. So we get back to the match. It's now a 2-on-3 match with the Young Bucks versus Jericho and LAX. The Bucks end up making their comeback, as you'd expect, off of a hot tag. They do their super kick stuff. They're going to go for a Meltzer driver, but Jericho intercepts one of the Bucks with a code breaker, and that was a really wicked spot. I'll give him that. And then that is followed by a Judas effect, so Jericho picks up the pinfall victory. So after that, things break down. And after this, a beatdown commences. Jericho and LAX are beating down the Bucks. But Cody Rhodes runs in. He couldn't run in to be their partner, but he'll come out here to help them now. But as Rhodes comes in and he's trying to even the odds, out comes Sammy Guevara, who hits Cody with a kick to the dick. Then Dustin Rhodes comes out to try to defend his brother's genitalia. That sounds weird. Dustin runs in. This is the first time we've seen him since the tag match against the Bucks. And he runs in and tries to help. He cleans house until out comes Jack Thwaga, otherwise known as Jake Hager, who takes out Dustin and then takes out Cody as well, and the Bucks and everyone. The crowd are chanting, "We the people," as commentary is telling us about Jake Hager and his undefeated record in Bellator and MMA. But even with all that, The only thing the crowd knows him as is Jack Swagger and We the People and the Hand Over Heart. So, even though the commentary can hype that up all they want, that is what Jack Swagger is recognized as. So, Hager hits a gut-wrench powerbomb on a podium that was set up in the ring to Dustin Rhodes. Jericho, after a few others lift up Cody, he's going to hit him with another Judas Effect elbow. And as the show goes off the air, the lasting image is Jericho, Santana, Ortiz, Sammy Guevara, and Jake Hager standing tall to end the show. So now that begs the question, is this a faction? Is it a common alliance? Because if it is a faction, then undoubtedly the head of the faction is Chris Jericho, right? I mean, he's the world champion. So, with that being said, if they're returning, they're bringing in Jake Hager, and this is how they debuted him, I wouldn't think that it's going to just be a second fiddle in a faction. Or maybe, it wouldn't be a bad idea to start off that way, and then maybe he turns on Jericho at some point. But I think that they can do a lot with Hager, because he's unique to most of their roster. They don't have a lot of big guys. They don't have many people that are as tall or as built, and for that matter, as legitimate as Jake Hager is, because even though it's not what the crowd knows him for, he does have the undefeated Bellator record. He has the legitimate fighting background, the amateur wrestling, all that. So that they have something there that they can really capitalize on. And I think it's a good move to bring him in. I definitely do. And this surprise at the end, it was a cherry on top, I guess, but it didn't make up for the rest of the show. So I am intrigued in what they're gonna do with Hager / Swagger. It'll take me a minute to get used to calling him Hager, but someone like him is definitely someone they could use on their roster. So I think he's a good guy to have, and we'll see what they do with him going forward. I'm interested if this is going to be a faction or if it's just a one-time sort of deal. But other than that, that's all I really got to say on this show. I felt like it didn't live up to what I thought it could have and had the potential to do. But there were some good things to take away. The Cody and Sammy match was great. The Jake Hager thing I'm interested in. And next week we'll have the tag team tournament, which I think will help the show be a little bit better with the in-ring quality of some of those first-round matchups that they can do. But yeah, that's all I got for you. I'm going to get off of here and watch NXT so I can come back and review that. Just, if you want to, let me know what you guys thought. Leave a comment or whatever. Did you think that this show did not live up to the hype as I did? Or whether you disagree with me as well. All is welcome. But until later on today with the NXT review, I will see you guys later.